I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on Norfolk Community Cable Television, NCTV. This series of shows is filmed in my garden in Norfolk, and we go through the garden season from beginning to end, and sometimes even in the middle, and look at what's growing, what needs to be done in the garden, and then what we can do with some of the things that we pick in the garden, or produce that's in season, and other seasonal cooking that can be done. Today I'm in the herb garden. It's early in April. We had some late snow in March, and I never thought it was going to end. The last show that we did, we were covered with snow. But now things have melted, mostly. We still have a few piles out by the street, but we're ready to get in the garden, and the garden is ready to grow. We're a little late this year. The tulip farm in Rhode Island estimates that they're 3 weeks behind as far as tulip blooms go, and I suspect we're about the same here. So some of the things we could have expected to come up now are going to be a little delayed. It all depends on how warm it gets and how many of the cooler days that we have also, as well as whether we have adequate rain. Things are starting to come up, and that's an exciting time in the garden. The chives are starting to come up. They'll be one of the first things we can harvest, as well as sorrel, which is another herb that we can harvest early. I noticed just now that fennel's coming up, and we're seeing a little bit of the rhubarb that sits right here. So it's time to do a few things. Right now I've raked off the herb garden. The wind keeps blowing the leaves back on, but the majority of them I have carted away to be composted. The same with my perennial gardens, and mostly the lawn, although it may need another touch-up if the wind keeps blowing. But with the rhubarb up, it's time to add some fertilizer to it, and I'll just use an all-purpose organic fertilizer and make a nice circle around it. We're supposed to have some rain tomorrow, so that will be good to water in the fertilizer. And I'll just scratch it in around the rhubarb. Rhubarb is a very hungry plant, and so it needs a little supplemental feeding. If you happen to have farmhouse manure that you can put around it, it really would like that. It would thrive with the addition of that. The other thing that I may need in here, in some areas, is some lime. Many of the herbs don't like the soil too acid. So I'm just using regular lime that you'd use on the lawn. The sorrel prefers it acid, as do the onions, but some of the thymes, which grow so well in the chalky soils of England, would like a little extra in the way of lime, and all you need is a little sprinkle, and some of these as well. We have oregano and tarragon in this area, and lavender, which could use just a tiny bit. A little more of the thyme. And the thyme that's down front has a lot of dead area on it. So I'll come in soon with my clippers and just clip that off, and then we'll get some nice new foliage. But there's no real hurry until things really start moving. Again, just a little bit of lime on a few things. The chives don't need it, but maybe a little on the sage and some of the others. I really don't use too much of it, except on plants that really prefer it less acid than our natural soil is here. I've removed any annual herbs that were in the garden. I did that last fall, but if you haven't done that, the time to do it is now. They won't come back up again, so you might as well get them out of here and open up spaces for the new things that you'll find at the garden centers. I noticed that the fennel started to grow. That's down in here. That reseeded from last year rather than coming up from the plant. So some of the herbs will reseed. So if you have herbs that do reseed, for instance, fennel is one of them, be aware while you're cleaning up and don't dig them all out. This is true of some of the perennials as well. Now let's move over to the perennial garden and see what's going on over there. I'm going to carry my bucket with me. I have bulbs planted throughout the garden, and it's time to start thinking about those and thinking about things to add and working on the things that are already here. I have some delphinium out here that could use a little extra lime. It prefers a little limier soil, and it also likes a little extra fertilizer. So we can add some of that. As well. And this is just a regular all-purpose organic garden fertilizer. For plants that prefer really acid soil, I'll use an acid fertilizer. Often what I use is called Hollytone. It's for acidic, acid-loving plants, those who like the acidic soil. And that fertilizer is designed to work really well with the acid soil. The thing that's kept me most busy is deer spray. Unfortunately, the deer like the crocuses and the tulips as much as I do. And I buy the spray in a concentrated form and mix it in a sprayer that I got at Garden Supply. And they do like crocuses, and I've been able to have crocuses in bloom by spraying them. And the tulips I've sprayed since they came up. I missed a few, and of course they got munched. Whether they will bloom, I don't know. The daffodils, however, are going to be fine. The deer don't like them a bit. They know to leave them alone, and they do. The same with the hyacinths. This is a hyacinth. They won't bother the hyacinths either. I've trimmed back most of my perennials, but I haven't done the butterfly bush yet. I'll wait a little longer on that until I start to see new foliage, and then trim it back probably close to all the way, maybe a foot, maybe down to the ground, depending on how much it grew last year. I have several of them, and I do need to keep them cut back. But again, deer spray after every rain. The directions on this particular one, which is liquid fence, there's also deer off and several other preparations. But this one says to use it once a week for 3 weeks and then once a month thereafter. So I will try to do that, but hit them much more frequently now. The idea is if you start early on the deer spray, the deer become used to leaving your yard alone, and then you don't have as much trouble going forward. If they get used to going through and eating everything right away, they keep coming back and consuming everything that comes up. There really is no plant that deer won't eat. I have decided. They prefer certain ones, tulips and crocuses being 2 of them, as well as some of the sedums. But they will leave daffodils alone unless they're extremely hungry, and then they might even eat those. So it's important to start keeping them away early. We see signs of plants coming up. I've noticed some that are going to need to be divided. Garden Club sale will be coming up in May, the 18th of May, I believe it is. And I will be digging plants to donate to that sale. Dividing plants keeps them growing well. Also gives you space for new plants, which if you're a dedicated gardener, you always want to have a few new ones as the season goes by. Or try growing some new things that is shown in some of the catalogs. Poppies are starting to come up. If you'll remember, the poppy foliage was up in the fall and it was fine, and now it's up again. The deer don't usually bother it, but they would probably bother the tulip that's right next to it, so we'll give that one a good spray. The other thing I can do is remove the mulch and baskets that I put on last fall. And these have been covering several plants. This is a lavender, which looks quite wonderful under the basket. I'm going to leave the basket here with the rock in it. That way if we get a real cold snap, I can put it back on. But we're probably okay to take them off. This one still has sleeves in it. And this was a chrysanthemum. And you'll see that the foliage is still there. I did not cut it back last fall. And it will break off quite neatly right now. And you can see underneath that I have chrysanthemum foliage here. This one's been here for several years now. And I can probably dig it up and divide it into 2 or 3 chrysanthemum plants. Then as I pinch them over the season, we'll have a number of other plants. But these will get put right here. I'll put the rock in. The wind is a little powerful today, so I don't want my baskets to blow away. Baskets get stored and then I'll use them again next year. I covered lavenders and chrysanthemums in this garden. They seem to do better if they have some winter protection. This area, as you can see, gets quite a bit of wind, and when it's cold, that can be drying as well as freezing, so I like to keep those plants covered. Other things will be coming up in the next few weeks as our temperatures moderate. Instead of temperatures in the 30s and 40s, we're anticipating 50s and maybe some 60s in the next week or so. So in another 2 weeks, we should see some pretty good progress. Now let's go down to the vegetable garden. You'll see all of our winter seeding pots over on this side along by the fence. It kind of helps keep them from blowing around if I have them up next to the fence. I'm not expecting to see too many shoots yet, but I was surprised to note that I did have some of the kale that is already germinated, and I have small kale plants. They'll be ready to set out into the garden in another few weeks. I have broccoli, I have quite a few flowers, perennial flowers that I'm hoping will start, and I've also got broccoli and cabbage planted so that I'll have little shoots and starts to put in the garden rather than putting the seeds in and waiting a long time. I did 6 or 8 in each of the milk cartons, milk jugs, and they will just stay here in the garden. If it's extremely dry, I'll water them a bit, but most of the time they'll just get the snow, the water, whatever comes down from the sky, and we'll look in and see little shoots coming up in the future. We're still burning brush. We've already done some of it, but with the wind we've had, a lot has come down and needs to be burned or carted away. Today would not be a good day. I don't think anybody can burn today. You do need to call the fire department. You need to have a permit if you want to burn brush, and they need to approve the brush burning for the day in question. You also need to have a hose, a shovel, and all kinds of things, and be far enough away from your home in order to burn brush. You can also take it over to the town recycling station and they will chip it up, and people can pick up chips and compost there as well. The strawberries are still covered with straw, and they'll stay covered. Here's a few that it's blown off a bit. I've outlined it so that when we do rototill the garden, the rototiller won't go into that area. I've delineated an area I want it to stay in. I'll remove some of the mulch from these berries and also add some of that organic garden fertilizer to them as they take off. Hopefully we will be enjoying some strawberries in late May or early June. The garlic is over here. We planted that in October, and where the straw is a little thin on that, you can see some of it starting to pop through. I'll just leave the mulch on that and it will come right up through the mulch. Mulch will keep the weeds down and protect it a little bit, and we should see our garlic up probably 6 or 8 inches in another couple weeks. Raspberries. We had a good crop last year, hoping for a good crop this year. Some of the canes that fruited last year need to be cut back. I have two types of raspberries, and I will cut them right to the ground. You can tell that the cane fruited last year because the bark is starting to come right off of it. It looks completely different than the newer canes, which are lighter colored. If you want to wait a little bit, you'll see that the new canes will start to leaf out shortly. You leave those in the garden and you remove the ones that fruited, and I'll add those to my burn pile. I also have, in addition to June-bearing raspberries, I have some raspberries that are supposedly ever-bearing. But in this climate, for me, they tend to be later blooming, later. And for these, I will cut them all the way to the ground, and I'll cut the whole patch down. And they will come up new, and these bloom a little later, into September, sometimes October, so that I can have raspberries from July on through October. I don't have a huge patch, but I do have enough for several desserts and a lot of cereal. So we want to keep them going as long as we can. I'm going to move up to the front of the garden where I have a little more fruit. As we go by, you'll notice I've uncovered the parsley from last year. Parsley is a biennial. I planted it last year, and it's coming up now. We have several plants. This will come up, and I'll be able to use it. It will be early. I'll be able to use that before the parsley I plant this year ever even comes up. And then this parsley will go to seed. So that is what a biennial is. It takes 2 years to mature and set seed. I could save the seed from it if I let it go to seed, or just use the parsley, and then the new crop will take over a little later in the season. I have more rhubarb up here, and again I'll repeat the process of adding fertilizer around it to give it a good start. I have 2 good clumps of rhubarb in here that I just uncovered, so they're just starting to come up. I have several blueberries, which admittedly don't do too much, and one of the reasons may be because some of the canes are pretty old. So I could take out the oldest bunch on each one and do the pruning of those at this time. They're setting blossoms, and you can tell the older, thicker stalks on the blueberries, and those are the ones that you might want to take out to rejuvenate it so that new ones will come up. Blueberries and rhubarb both like very acid soil, so I'll be using the Hollytone or acid fertilizer around them, and also using a preparation to make the soil even more acid. It's a sulfur preparation that you can put around the blueberries and also your hydrangeas. It keeps the hydrangeas blue and the blueberries growing well. So we'll be adding some of those things. Peat is also a good mulch for blueberries, as are pine needles, because they are acidic. So I may put some pine needles around these. We have plenty of those. And try to improve my crop. My biggest problem with the blueberries is birds. And you have to cover them and cover them well, because the birds like them just as much as I do. And they are willing to go to great lengths to get under any cover you put over them to get the blueberries. So we will be working on a little better system of covering them when they start to ripen. Now let's head towards the backyard and see what's going on back there. I had the planters filled with red twig dogwood sticks and pine boughs, and now that the ground is thawed, I can take those out and either compost them or save them to use later. I kind of like the red twig dogwood stems to add to floral arrangements, so I'll probably save those, and these again can be recycled, composted, or burned. I will be replanting these planters with other crops, and I'll add a layer of compost from my compost pile to build up the soil and dig it in. Perhaps take some of the soil that's in there out and add back to the compost to rejuvenate it so that the plants I put in will grow this spring. Let's head back this way a little bit. What started as a few crocuses, and these are Crocus tomasianus, which is an early crocus, turned out to be a whole field of crocuses. They have just divided and spread throughout this area. I love them. They're early. The foliage dies back early, but they give you a lot of color really early in the season, which makes it a lot nicer to work out here cleaning up. I've cleaned up this area lightly. I'm trying to leave some of the leaves, but not too many. It is a woodland garden, and trees shed their leaves. Nobody goes into the woods and collects all the leaves, so the plants still grow. So we want to leave some of the leaves, but I've removed a few so that I can see my flowers that are here. And these are the hellebores, and it's now in bloom, but I'm going to remove the old leaves. I've done it with most of them, but I've saved one. And I'll take all the old leaves off. It blooms and then it forms new leaves. So these old ratty leaves can come off anytime. Take a few of the leaves out from around it. And you can see that it's in bloom. And we have flowers already here, blooming away. And I have a lot of these in the garden. They're a little subtle. It will form new leaves after the blooms, and the blooms stay on for a very long time. I have a row of them because they have tended to make new flowers and new plants when they go to seed, like the crocuses. But I like them. They're very early, and these are some of the earliest shade plants. They're still getting a little sun because this is a deciduous wooded area. And so this gives them enough sun to get going. And they're throughout this area. They are in different colors. There are a lot of hybrids available now that go from dark, dark purple, almost black, to white, and some yellows. These are just kind of a generic hellebore, and some of them are lighter and some of them are darker as they've come up. They're into the rock wall here, along with the snowdrops, and they just give a lot of early spring color. I'll move this so you can perhaps see them a little better. And cutting the foliage back really improves the show. One thing I will mention, though, is that the foliage is poison, so please add it to the trash. Don't put it in your compost pile. These plants are poison, so any parts of them that you remove, do put them into the compost pile. And if you have animals that, pets that might eat them, you might not want to plant them. My dog doesn't bother them at all, and the deer don't bother them, which is a real advantage. Now, going back towards the pond. I'm back at the pond, and it's time to remove my little heater. I don't think we're going to have any more ice. It kept a little hole in the ice so that the gases from the fish could come out of the pond. And it's been plugged in all winter on a thermostat. It only ran when it needed to, saving some electricity. But we're going to take it out now, and I come out many days and scoop out any leaves that are blowing into the pond. It's pretty murky right now. In the next few weeks, I will be draining it partially and then cleaning it, scooping it out as best I can, filling it with a little more water, and we'll add the waterfall and the pump and the filtration system, which is a mechanical filter, which will filter out all the things that fly into it. At that point, the water will gradually clear. It's not instant, but it will clear slowly. And we have 7 little fishies in there that made it through the winter. And hopefully they will have a happy summer and continue to thrive. They've seemed to have grown during the winter, so they at least did not shrink. So that's a good sign that they look healthy. I do want to put in my thermometer. I have a little water thermometer that I'm going to tie down. And I'll just tie it right here for now. I think I need a longer string. At any rate, I want to see what the temperature of the pond is, and I'm not going to start feeding the fish until the water in the pond is at least 50 degrees, and a solid 50 degrees. The fish do not metabolize food until the water is warmer, and they are cold-blooded, so their temperature goes along with the water. So at that point I can start giving them some food, and we'll add the filtration, and they'll be off and running. You can use a winter food for them, which is a little easier on their systems at first. I have some winter food, generally don't need to use it more than a week or two, and I'll just give them a little each day, and then they will transition over to the regular fish food a little later. I do have to be careful that the heron doesn't come in. They do have their flutile down in the pond itself, and I noted that they've been using it. They do spend quite a bit of time in that flutile. It's kind of their little cottage underneath the water, and hopefully they will know enough to get in there if a heron or other large bird comes into this area and sees them and would like to eat them for dinner. I did not have one of those and lost all my fish 2 years ago, which is why I added it. You really do need something where they can get away if you don't have good plant cover. Being in the shade here much of the season, I can't grow a lot of lily pads on top of the pond, which would hide the fish. I do put an occasional lily in, but they never thrive because it's too shady. So we need to have a place for the fish to hide instead. And it seems to be working. Now let's go and plant some plants. I couldn't resist stopping at the nursery and picking up a few plants. And there are a few things you can put outside now, even though the weather isn't quite firmed up yet. But I did buy a few spring plants. And once these have finished in my pot, I can plant them. They possibly will bloom in another few years. At least the daffodils almost certainly will. And the pansies, so fragrant right now, and so pretty, and sweet alyssum, another very sweet smelling plant. And I got these to put in a basket that I want to put near my front door. It's kind of a sheltered spot, so it should be out of the wind. You can see these tulips have a pretty good root. And I'm going to just add those to the back of the pot. And some daffodils. A blue hyacinth would have been nice, but they didn't happen to have one. This is sweet alyssum, and this will continue to grow and bloom and will actually expand a bit, whereas the bulbs will not. And of course, some pansies. Pansies will continue to bloom for quite a long time. If you keep deadheading them or taking off the spent blooms. And these have already put roots right through the bottom of these little containers, so we need to carefully remove them. There we go. You can see they have lots of roots. And in order to get them to expand a little bit, I'll loosen those roots as I go. And put a few of these in and crowd them right in here. I did add a little bit of moss around the edge of the basket. I have a flower pot in here, and I thought the moss kind of dressed it up a little bit inside the basket. Underneath this flower pot, I have a plant saucer that will pick up any moisture. This one I'm going to save until later and only put in 3. Then I want to fill in around them with some of the potting soil. We'll water everything in well. Actually, it has been fairly dry, even though we've had a little rain. They're saying that generally the ground is dry and the plants, so you do need to water. And always when you plant something, you water it in and make sure that there's plenty of soil around the plants. There, this can go on my front step along with a ceramic rabbit for the Easter season. The next thing I want to do is plant the pot that's right here. This had greens in it at Christmas. They came out. I added some compost, and now I'm going to add 4 to 6, I guess I'll add 6 lettuce plants. This will give me some very early lettuce for salads. The fact that it's in a raised pot, the pot will heat up a little faster and get a little jump on the season. And it's amazing, out of 6 little plants. And I also have another 6 to put in another pot. And I'll just plant those right into the compost, which will give them a really good start. And that's a and then to give the plant some color, I'll add some violas. Violas are smaller pansies, but they are in the same family. And again, these roots have gone all the way through. They're very well rooted. I would love to be able to grow these myself from seed. I've tried, and my conditions just aren't the same as they have in the greenhouses. My shed is too cold and my house is too warm, so I'm not able to do these. Pansies are very, very tolerant of colder temperatures. And again, we want to open them up a little bit. Pansies and violas. I do have some that have perennialized in the garden here and there in my flower garden. And I may move some of these out to that area and see if I can get them to set seed and come back another year. Then I'll add some of the red twig dogwood. These I used with the greens, but they also look nice. They give a little height to the pot. And things will fill in soon. And there we have a couple pots for spring. These will last until it's time to put in spring annuals around the end of May. We do need to water them. I can also add pansies to other pots and lettuce. Get an early start. I like pansies in my window boxes. They're starting to be more available in the stores, as well as various vegetable starts. It's way too early to set out your tomatoes, though. That won't happen. In fact, we're going to go inside and plant some tomatoes right now. And they'll be ready to set out around the end of May. when the soil has really warmed up for them. Now let's go inside and plant a few things. I've already planted a number of things outside in my milk jugs, but I've also planted some things inside too. Mostly some flowers, some impatiens and cleome. And I'm going to be planting today some peppers and some cucumbers. I'm using the seeding system with the water in the bottom and a wicking cloth and then a soil-filled cell unit on top. And I've already filled those. These are hot peppers, and I don't need too many of those, although I might share some with my son. So I'm going to put 1 or 2. This is a mixed hot pepper package, so I'm not sure what we'll get. But I had pretty good luck with some of them last year, so we'll try it again. I'm going to put 1 or 2 in each of the spots. I want to use up the package. It is a package that I had from last year, and it will be good for several years. But I thought it would be time to use it up this year and get a new one next year. So I've got 1 or 2 in each slot. When they get a little older, they may or may not germinate, so we're hoping to get at least 6 or 7 out of this. And I'm going to just lightly cover them with soil. You can always divide them if more than one come up in a cell before I transplant them out. Then I put on the clear dome, and this will go under my plant lights and be labeled. And I've labeled this hot peppers. I use a piece of masking tape and a pen to label it hot peppers. And that will go under my plant lights. I have another one set up for tomatoes. And I have a lot of different kinds of tomatoes. I love trying different ones. And one of my favorites is the Amish paste. So that's a good one. I like that one. So I'll probably plant more than 4 of these. And again, these are last year's seeds, so I'm going to put 2 in each compartment. And I'm going to do 5 of those. And I'm going to write that down on a piece of paper with little dots so that I know where I put them. And these 3 will be yellow pear. The next 3 are yellow pear. One of these is probably going to be enough, but I will have an extra to share, an extra or 2 to share. So we'll have plenty of these to share. And again, we'll just cover the seeds and tamp it down well. Make sure I keep water in the lower chamber of these as they grow. The soil is damp, being put in the planter. Okay, so we've done those. The next one will be Jetstar, and I'll do 4 of those. The reason I make a little diagram is because they all look alike when they come up. And I don't want to have all cherry tomatoes or all plum tomatoes and no main season tomatoes. These in. These are Jetstars, which is a good main season tomato. They're not extremely large, but they're very tasty. And a nice slicer. The next one I'll do is a Jasper. And these are in a little bag. These are Jasper cherry tomatoes. And finish this bag. Again, all I want is 1 cherry tomato plant in my garden because they fruit prolifically. So I really don't need any more than one of those. The next is a Cherokee Purple, which is antique hybrid or antique plant, one of the old tomatoes. And they're a dark color, a dark purple, very juicy, and again, very tasty. And then the last one are tomatillos. And I've already started a few of those, which I've put out into my shed, as well as some lettuce that's gone out there. But I'm going to start a few more in here and see how it compares. I have not grown these before, so it's something new for me, and I'm not sure which seedlings will work the best, whether to start them under the lights or to, again, I started them in here until they came up and then moved them out to the cooler shed. So it's an experiment, which is always fun in gardening, to see what happens. So we'll write these down. Jasper, which is a cherry, and Cherokee Purple. I'll keep this little list along with my seeds, and then when they come up, I'll know where they are. I've put a label that says tomatoes on the front, so I know which is the front and where to start. One year I didn't do that, and I didn't know which end I had started from, and they got mixed up. So this year I've learned over the years that you label well and have a good system so that you don't get confused, usually. So we'll put these up under the lights and wait for another week or so until they start to grow. I will keep water in the cells below, in the chamber below, that will wick up in and keep them watered. And when they start to put on a real true leaf, the first leaf that comes onto a plant from the seed is a seed leaf. But we wait for the next leaf, which is the first true leaf, and then we can start adding some liquid fertilizer to the water below. I dilute it with the water into the water where I water the cell, and we'll add the fertilizer until it's time to move these to larger containers or out into the garden. And that's all it is to starting seed. Having a seed starting unit helps a great deal. Having some lights to put over it. You can start them on the windowsill, but you'll need to get them outdoors fast. Also, you need to start putting them out and bringing them in before you set them in the garden. This will take place probably about mid-May. I'll start putting them outside for a few hours a day, increasing the sun that they get. Otherwise, if you just put tomato seedlings that have been inside and really coddled out in the sun in the garden, they will dry up and just sunburn completely immediately. You need to harden them off and get them used to being outside. Sometimes having a fan on the seedlings helps too. It gets them to be a little stronger because they have to fight against the air that's blowing against them. We'll probably set that up the next show that I do. Now, let's go in the kitchen and make some things for a spring brunch or perhaps an Easter breakfast. Here we are in the kitchen again. And today I'm going to make a quick coffee cake that works really well for all kinds of occasions. And if you're having a spring brunch, it's something you can make a little ahead of time. Or if you're really pressed for time, it goes together pretty quickly. No rising of dough and no exotic ingredients. It just is an old dependable coffee cake that I make frequently. Now, today I'm going to make it in this pan, which is a smaller pan. The recipe that I'm going to give you the instructions for would fit into a foil pizza pan that you would grease and flour and use. I'm making half a recipe. And I'm going to give you the ingredients for the full recipe as I go. So I'm going to have to kind of look at that, but you probably want to make the larger one for most occasions. I'm going to start out with 2 1/4 cups of flour and 3/4 of a cup of sugar. And then I'll put in 3/4 of a cup of butter in slices. And we'll spin that together to make crumbs. Now it's a nice crumbly mixture. And I'm going to take out 1/4 of a cup. Actually, I would be taking out 1/2 a cup if I were doing the whole recipe. So take out 1/2 a cup, save it. And to the rest of it, I'll add 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. So baking powder and baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon each, 1/4 teaspoon salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. And we can spin that together a little bit. Then I have 2/3 cup buttermilk and 1 egg, and I've mixed that, and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. I'm sorry, 1 teaspoon of vanilla. I'm using 1/2, be 1. I'll mix that, and I'll mix that in with the dry things. And we'll make a dough with that. At this point, I'm going to take out a cup of the dough and reserve it. And the rest I'm going to put in my pan, which has been greased and floured. And I'd like to say the easiest way that I could use a nice spreader to spread this around, but the easiest way is to flour fingers, use floured fingers, and just spread it around till it fills the pan. And fill it all the way to the edge. And then wash your hands. At this time, I will add on the top 1.25 cups of pie filling. And I'm using cherry pie filling, but you could use blueberry just as well, or any of the others. I don't think pumpkin would be very good, but one of the fruit pie fillings. And it's not the whole can. When you go to make the whole recipe, it is 1 1/4 cups, but not the whole thing. So you'll have some left that you can use to fill cookies or put on ice cream or make a small pie or whatever you'd like. Spread on your toast, for that matter. And then I'm going to use a spoon and just dot the saved dough on top. And then I'll just sprinkle on those crumbs that we saved at the beginning. This is going to go into a 350-degree oven for about 1/2 hour. And while that's baking, we're going to get something ready for a main course. And for this, I'm going to be over here and use some puff pastry. I'll use 1 sheet. This comes frozen, and you need to thaw it at room temperature about 20 minutes before you use it. I'm going to roll this out a little more and attempt to double its size both ways. Again, I want to keep flour under it so that it doesn't stick. I just want it a little thinner than it is. You can use this frozen puff pastry to make all kinds of pastries. This will be a savory one. I'm going to be cutting this into squares. I've mixed an egg with a tablespoon of water. And I'm going to brush the pastries with that mixture. It's called an egg wash. I have here asparagus, some nice little spears. They're very nice at this time of the year. They'll soon be available in our area, but not quite yet. It'll be south of here. Add a little salt and pepper to the asparagus. I've already drizzled it with a little olive oil. And now I have some sliced deli ham. I'm going to put a strip on each of the pastries. And I have some shredded cheese. This is an Asiago. You could use Swiss or cheddar. And I'm going to put 4 strip pieces of asparagus on each of these crosswise. And sprinkle on a little of the cheese. Just a bit. And then we'll fold these up and fasten them in little packages around the asparagus. Something a little different for a brunch or luncheon. And they'll go in for about 15 minutes. And while they're baking, I'll come back over to this side and make a few more things to go with our meal. The first thing I'm going to do is color some eggs. Even though I don't have young children in the house anymore, I still have to color a few eggs for Easter. It's just something that I've always done. And lately I've been using natural egg dyes. And how I got these dyes, I've done it before on some of the other shows, but this one is made with beets. And I had a few small beets, which I peeled and cut in cubes, and then I boiled them with 2 cups of water. It would have been probably about 2 cups of beets and 2 cups of water, and I boiled them until they were very well done. I did the same with about 2 cups of red cabbage, and that is this one. I strained each of these. I strained out the beets and the cabbage. They are not edible at that point because they've been way overcooked, and all of the color has come out of them. They look very miserable, but they're very good for the compost. At any rate, then I added a tablespoon of white vinegar to each of them. You need the vinegar in order to have the color come to. And then these eggs have been boiled, and I have found that the best way to boil eggs is to use my Instant Pot. You can boil eggs in 5 minutes, and they're perfect every time. And you can see they're already coloring up. And we'll just let them sit, and I'll come and turn them occasionally. The other thing that I want to do is make some fruit. Fruit goes well with the brunch, and when they're done, we'll put them on a rack on a paper towel to dry before we put them back in a carton or in a bowl. I'm going to make some fruit skewers, and I bought just a container of mixed fruit. And I have some small skewers, and I'll just put the fruit on the skewers. It makes it a little more festive. Some blueberries, some blackberries, several different kinds of melon. And we can put those out. This is really nice. Kids like these, adults like them. It's a little change if you're having an Easter brunch from all that candy. And it makes it a little more festive than just having a bowl of mixed fruit. The garlic that we harvested last fall, I'm keeping in the garage, which is cool, but evidently not cool enough. And also spring has gotten the garlic's juices going, and it wants to grow. And once it grows, it really deteriorates quickly. It becomes bitter where it's green. And so I'd like to salvage some of it to keep using it until we have our new garlic. And so I'm going to take some of it and peel it. And I'll get a paper towel to peel it on here and put it in a jar. Now, one of the ways that people formerly kept garlic was to put it in oil. And please don't do that, because garlic is very prone to botulism, which is a pretty dangerous food poisoning. So what I'm going to do is just separate it and cut off the root ends. And I will, before I'm finished, wash it. And any of these little green sprouts that are starting to come. Hopefully I should have gotten it before then. But it's really not safe to keep in the refrigerator in oil. Actually, no herbs are safe that you do yourself. You can buy garlic in oil, but they add a preservative to it. And if you don't do that, botulism is a real risk, because botulism is what's called an anaerobic bacteria. It grows without air, and by coating something with oil, you exclude the air and allow it to grow. So what I'm going to do is give this a quick wash and dry, and put it into a little freezer jar or canning jar, cover it up and put it in the freezer, and then I will use it frozen. I'll take out as much as I need when it's all frozen and use it just by crushing it or chopping it. It would thaw very quickly. You don't want to leave it hanging around in the refrigerator. It can be quite dangerous when it's all prepared like this. But this will give me the opportunity to keep the garlic. The other option that I could do is plant it. So if it's starting to sprout, you can just plant it. If you have garlic you purchased that's starting to sprout, just go ahead and plant it. And you'll probably have a late crop, maybe in the fall, but you should get a crop from it. So that's my word on storing garlic, or trying to keep garlic a little bit longer so that it'll last until the crop comes in about the end of July, the ones that are growing in the garden right now. It's time to get our coffee cake out of the oven. And we'll finish it off with a little bit of vanilla frosting. And this is just confectioner's sugar, milk, and a few drops of vanilla. And I'll just drizzle some on the top to finish it off. Well, let's add it to the other items in the dining room and see what we have for an Easter breakfast or springtime lunch. Well, here we are in the dining room ready for our lunch or brunch. For a breakfast or brunch, I might like to add an omelet or a plate of scrambled eggs to this menu. We also have the hard-cooked eggs that have been dyed in the various things. You'll see that the red cabbage produces a lovely blue egg. And the beets were made a little darker pink egg. The coffee cake is ready, and it can be served either warm or cold. It's very good either way. And again, you can use any kind of pie filling that you'd like in it. Our little packets of asparagus and ham and cheese should be served pretty much right out of the oven. They could be reheated, but they're so quick to make, and you could have them all ready to go in the oven before your guests arrive. You could also have your fruit kebabs made. The centerpiece that I'm using, I started on my last show, and I planted grass in this little box. I found a picture on the internet, which I printed off and fastened to the front of the box and added a few eggs, and I have an instant centerpiece for my table. Something that the guests could see over if they were seated on both sides of the table. You want to keep your centerpieces quite low so people can see over them to have conversations. So we're ready for spring, and we hope it keeps coming and we don't have any more snow this year. I'm Liz Davey. You've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television.